In this video, we will talk about variables. Variables are very important in statistics, and not just in statistics. Variables are a fundamental concept in every science. We define variables, we measure variables, we analyze variables, usually with statistics, and then we draw conclusions relating to our original questions, which also have to be posed in the form of variables. So, what are variables? Well, variables can be thought of as containers that can take different values. So in other words, you can start by thinking of a variable as being a box, and you can put some things in it, but not everything. So that's the important thing. A variable is a box that can admit only certain kinds of things. What you can put in are the values of the variable. So it can take different values, and the variable itself is defined by having a name, and then also the types and ranges of the values that can be associated with it. Examples of variables are things like sex, height, birth order, birth year, and these are frequently used variables in research that has to do with people. So in other words, the box must have a name, and it also needs to have a definition of what kinds of values can go in. For example, if the name is sex, then possible values might be female and male. So there's only two words that can go into that box, one for each person that is measured on this variable. If the variable is height, then the values that can go in the box are very different. In this case, they would be numbers, and they can be the number of centimeters, or it can be a number of meters, and that's part of the definition of the variable. It's very important so we don't get confused between 1.6 and 160. For another variable that might be called the birth year, the possible values that can go into the box is the year in which the person was born. So variables of these sorts must refer to some entity. That's the entity being measured. And we usually think of entities related to the variables of the examples as being persons, but they could have been animals. Indeed, they could have been trees. And there's also different kinds of entities that can be studied, and we can define and measure variables on them depending on the kind of research that we're interested in. So other people may study countries or species or buildings or whatever, but there's always an entity on which the variable is measured. And it's very important that we need to define and be aware of the properties of the values that go into the variable. And these depend on what kind of variable this is. The kinds of things that we need to define are the possible values, if there are any units of measurement, how we derive those values, and what scale those values are measured on. We will talk about scale in a different video, but about the other things, we can talk a little bit more when it comes to the definition of the content of a variable, starting with the values. And we've already seen two different kinds of possible values that can go in. One is words, as in the variable sex. We actually use the words male or female. We could have used the letters M or F, or we could have used K and M. If we were using the Norwegian initials, we can use codes. We can use 1 or 2 for the two sexes, or in some kinds of research, we might want to have more labels permissible and not just 2. So we need to define all those things. What is the range of values that can go in? Is there a limited set? And specifically, which one is it? Which words go in there? It's very confusing, and it's going to lead to a lot of mistakes if we don't specifically limit the range to the minimum number of values that can code what we're interested in. So if one person is using labels male and female, and another person is using kvinne and man, then this is going to be very confusing because you're going to have 4 labels in our sex variable, and this is not going to work when you try to analyze. So the specific definition of what is the permissible set of values is very important. The other type of values is numbers. So we need to be aware of what kinds of numbers can go into the box. Is there a range of numbers? Are all the numbers limited to be, for example, between 0 and 1 or between 0 and 100? Can it be any number? Do they have to be integers, or can they have decimal places? Are there units associated with these numbers? When they're actual numbers, they have a meaning that's expressed by some unit. So is it centimeters? Is it meters? Is it kilograms? Is it seconds? Is it years? What exactly are the numbers? This is a very important part of the definition. Then there is the issue of how we get those values, whether they are words or numbers. Do we use a questionnaire? Do we ask people, how tall are you? Or do you use an instrument? Like, do we have a measuring tape or some other device to measure people's heights ourselves? Do we look up their heights in some sort of database? So the mode of obtaining the value can be very important. And finally, there is the issue of measuring scale, which defines what we can do with these values, and we're going to talk about that in the next video. So as a final definition, when we talk about variables, and this might come as a bit of a surprise, is that measurement is the action of assigning a value to a variable. Measuring isn't only when you use a measuring tape to find out what a person's height is. It is also measurement in this sense when we ask someone, how tall are you? And we write down the answer that we get. Any way that we can use to assign a value to a variable is called a measurement.